Due to the graphic nature of the personal accounts and content discussed in this podcast, listener discretion is advised. Many episodes will include graphic personal accounts and discussions of child sexual assault, domestic violence, physical abuse, rape, sexual situations, and suicide.
It was worth it. If anyone wants to know, it was worth it. Let me reap what I sow.
Welcome to Latter-day Survivors. I am Sarah Haley, and I'm here with Kindra today. This is one of our deep thought conversations. It's not going to be a regular episode, so to say, with a guest, but we have just Kindra and I have a topic that has been dear to my heart recently that I've been doing a lot of thinking and researching on, and we just wanted to get on and discuss it today. So the topic today is going to be compulsory heterosexuality. It's the theory that heterosexuality is assumed and enforced upon people by a patriarchal and heteronormative society. So within our society, it is assumed that people are heterosexual until proven otherwise. Kind of like, you're innocent until proven guilty. It's kind of the same idea, that people just assume that you're heterosexual until you come out as otherwise. And it's just so often the whole society it's a heteronormative society that people grow up. And the reason this is near and dear to my heart is because I'm 40 and just now realizing that I'm lesbian, and it's just, and I've been thinking, why did this never even occur to me before? Often when you hear people coming out later in life, they're like, oh, I always knew, I just didn't have the courage. I didn't know
Right.
until I got out of the church and, started exploring myself a little more and realizing like, oh, my whole life. And then, thinking back, I can think on things that were like, oh, that makes sense. But I had no idea till I was in my 40s. And that's because, late 30s. And that's because we live in a world where we are told we're heterosexual.
Absolutely.
And it's nothing beyond that. So anyway, Kindra and I have been doing some research on this. And Kindra, where'd you want to start? Did you have any more specific?
Well, I took some notes because as I was reading this article that you sent me that was from 1980, right? What was the name of the article?
Yeah, it was by Adrienne Rich, and the title of it is Compulsory Heterosexuality and the Lesbian Existence.
Right.
And it's amazing to me that was in 1980. That's over 40 years ago, and this is still an issue.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that it had me thinking about is just the whole idea, like you were saying, that we are conditioned in our society to believe that in order to promote the species, in order to continue having population, we have to be together with a man, at least in some way, right? So we have to be married to them, we have to have sex with them in order to make a child. So then it becomes like this religion thing. Religion is really pushes women and men to be together, and that there's no other way. So one of the things that I was thinking about with women, especially in the church, in the Mormon church, since we're Latter-day Survivors and kind of you and I are both ex-mo. I just had written down that single women in the church are looked down upon. They're old maids. They cannot achieve the highest level of heaven. So women in the church, that in order to conform, in order to be seen as someone with any status, they have to be married to a man. And then divorced men and women are pressured to remarry. So it's like the man cannot be without the woman and the woman cannot be without the man. Women are pressured to marry early. So for me, I got married when I was 19.
Yeah.
I happened to also be pregnant, but that was from a previous relationship, I'll call it. And because of my promiscuity. There's one of those words that that the church likes to use. I was seen as, I was looked down upon. I was disfellowshipped. I was not clean. I was not worthy. So I was pressured to marry early. And I think that part of that is because when women marry early, when men marry early, it's before they've had the opportunity to figure out who they are and what they want. They're supposed to learn together who they are and what they want and keep each other in line as far as like going to the temple and going to church and continuing to be indoctrinated into that way of thinking. So this is before a woman can even decide if they even want to marry a man. It's before they explore their own sexuality, which being sexual in any way outside of marriage between a man and a woman is a sin. So how can a woman possibly know if they want to be married to a man or married to a woman? If they want to, it's just the expectation. And there's a lot of pressure along with that to be married to a man. So a lot of, ragey type feelings coming out from me as I was reading through and researching along with you. But I want to also say, so it takes a lot of courage to come out. Like you had said that, you didn't realize that you were a lesbian until you left the church and were allowed to explore your sexuality. And right. Like for me, I've been married to a man for 26 years. And, I haven't divulged this on the podcast so much yet, but there's a lot of issues around for me around trust, and I think that there's a lot of issues related to the expectations between my husband and I about what's right and wrong. So he stopped going to church within like 4 years of us getting married. But he was where I am now back then, and wanting to explore outside of our marriage, and did so without consent. And, in order to stay married to me, he had to lie to me, so there was a lot of issues around that. So I don't want to badmouth him, because I feel like there's a lot of things that happened that were due to past traumas in both of our lives, and due to me wanting to maintain our spirituality, I felt like I was responsible for our eternal salvation, because he was no longer following the precepts of the gospel. So when I left the church, he wanted to open our relationship, which I was scared to death to do. And so it didn't feel good to me. There was a lot of cognitive dissonance around that for me, because there was already a lack of trust in our relationship. And so when we did open our relationship, it was not done in a way that I felt was very ethical. And so I felt like I was kind of not a priority for him again. And then I decided that I was going to explore a little bit too. Well, I dated a couple of men, but it wasn't until I dated a woman that I realized, sorry, let me go back. It wasn't until I dated someone who was non-binary, so she's trans, she, they, that I realized that I'm not straight, I'm not necessarily a lesbian. I don't know. I don't like labels, really. It's kind of right. Like labels, I feel like limit me to a certain expectation, a certain group. So I can't label myself, because I've not had the experience to know what I like and what I don't like, what I am without a man, what I am outside the church. So, sorry, I'm kind of monopolizing the conversation, but this
No,
is
you're
my way of also coming out. So I don't really say that I'm a lesbian, but I am pansexual. I don't have a specific connection to genitalia. Like it's more
right.
about it's more about the connection, the deep connection and the trust between two people and feeling safe.
Yeah.
And feeling like, so there's also demisexual and sapiosexual. So demisexual would be where I have to have an emotional connection with the person to feel any sexual feelings. And then sapiosexual, where I have to be able to have smart, intelligent conversations, philosophical conversations. You know, I love sarcasm and being able to just be witty with somebody and having comebacks really quick. You know, like you just don't miss a beat, kind of thing. And so, you know, all three of those, I guess, would describe me: pansexuality, demisexuality, and sapiosexuality.
Yeah.
So between my husband and I, we're gonna, you know, we're trying to be friends still. But also there's a lot of distance that had to come between us to be able to make things safe, you know, because they haven't been safe our entire marriage. And I'm not just talking about what he's done. I'm talking about like me having expectations of him that were more than what he was willing to give. He went to church with me when he didn't believe. And I see where I'm at right now and how angry I am at the church. And I don't want, I would never have been able to do that without feeling completely dissociated all the time.
Yeah.
So anyway, that was kind of my way of explaining where I am personally. And I don't really have to explain to anybody, but it's just interesting the things that change in our minds when we're actually given the opportunity to learn and
Right.
to experience life.
Right.
So,
And I feel like I'm very much parallel to you. Like my husband and I were married for 20 years and we're very near the finalization of our divorce now. And it was, you know, after we left the church, my husband also wanted to open the marriage. And I had told him that I would be interested in trying to date a woman, you know, like, and I had no interest, like when we were talking about dating, I had no interest in dating a man at all. Like the thought of dating a man was like, ew, you know, like I've had enough men. I don't know. And I've only had one, but
right. That's enough.
right. But, and he even said, you know, like we set up some boundaries to open our marriage in a good way or whatever. And one thing that he said, and now thinking back on it, I'm like, that's crazy that I agreed to that, but I agreed because I didn't care. But one thing that he said, that he was okay with us opening our marriage if I only dated women. Like he didn't want me dating other men. He could date women. Like he wanted to date women.
A one penis policy.
Right. Right. But he didn't want me to date any other men. And I was okay. I was like, okay, you know, I agreed to that because I had no interest in dating men. But now thinking back on that, I was like, that wasn't fair at all, you know, for him to be okay with him dating other women and then me dating only women. But it worked out. And I think he thought that he wouldn't feel threatened. But then I got a relationship with another woman and he very quickly felt threatened by it. And it was shortly after that that he told me he wanted a divorce because he felt like I wasn't making him a priority. And suddenly he was threatened by this relationship I had, which ended up being very good. But what you had said, you know, going back to this article, you had brought up religion and how religion is very much part of this compulsory heterosexuality, hugely. And in one of the articles that I read, it said much of religion invokes a binary model for sexuality, you know, man, woman, just like, you know, like in the Bible, in Leviticus, where it says, thou shalt not lie with mankind as with womankind, for it is an abomination. And then it goes on to say, religious institutions throughout history have had strict moral guidelines when it comes to marriage and what is deemed acceptable in the eyes of God. This directly translates to compulsory heterosexuality in society through influence of leaders of the church as well as in devout followers of this belief. And it's crazy how much, you know, churches, you know, like have that binary man woman, you know, like there's no room for homosexuality or even intersex people. I know that we've had at least one guest that was intersex, and you said you're not attracted to genitalia. There's so much emphasis placed on genitalia. Like, a trans woman, people say, well, you're still a man,
Right.
or trans men, well, you're still a woman, like that's, how do you know what's in their pants? Are we investigating, or like with my sexuality, I say that I'm lesbian just because I'm most comfortable with women, as I've found out, like, and I don't know if that's because of my past trauma. No idea. No idea why I'm more comfortable with women, but I'm much more comfortable with women. But yes, I definitely more align with the demisexual, like you were saying. Like, I have to have that emotional connection with someone to have that sexual attraction. Like, actually, my girlfriend and I will talk, and she'll see someone on the street, and she'll be like, well, that person's hot, and I'm like, it's like it's so rare for me to see someone on the street that I find attractive, because I have to have that connection with someone to even feel that attraction to anyone. Sorry, I'm kind of bouncing around here too, but that's why this is a Deep Thoughts episode. We just kind of bounce
right. That's right. Yeah, and I'm sure it's going to go in random directions, and I think that's okay.
It is. Yeah. And that's, we're just not given that room to explore who we are. And I have pages and pages of notes that I thought I would go in order, but now my mind is over here, so we're going to bounce over here to the end of my notes, but we'll go back. Yeah. One thing that I think is super interesting, it says here, the theory of compulsory heterosexuality is criticized for upholding the existence of a binary gendered system, like we were talking about binary, the binary man-woman within the church, and the strict roles under this binary system. This criticism states that compulsory heterosexuality ignores individuals who act outside of their prescribed gender roles, as well as ignoring individual agency in life. And then it says, therefore, as lesbian and gay visibility increase, compulsory heterosexuality decreases. As individual freedoms and sexual minorities increase, the institution of heterosexuality disappears. One thing I remember when I was a TBM within the church and had these strong binary thoughts and ideals, I never understood pride, like gay pride. Like, why is there gay pride? Like, why do we care who you're sleeping with? You can sleep with who you're going to sleep with, but why do you have to announce it?
Right.
But the more visible that these relationships are, the more freedom it allows others to explore who they are. It's not going to make someone gay that's not gay. It's not going to make someone trans that's not trans, but it offers more visibility and more freedom and more safety for more people to explore who they are. Yeah. And one thing that I've noticed with my daughter and her friends, like, it almost seems like there's no compulsory heterosexuality within middle school right now. And I don't know if it's just where I'm living or if it's in general, but like, I feel like most of her friends identify as queer in one way or another, and they don't even, they don't, there's no hiding it. There's no coming out of the closet. They just are who they are. And I think that's amazing. And I think that's beautiful. One thing that I love about my daughter is she's always been who she is, unapologetically herself. Even when we were within the church, she was unapologetically herself. And I think it's just because there is so much more visibility. Yeah. And
a lot more people speaking up,
Right.
I mean,
and they don't feel like they have to hide. And then, so I think this is a whole generation of people that aren't going to grow up and be 40 years old and wondering what happened with the last 40 years. Yeah. So that visibility is so important.
So I think about that and kind of looking at like what we're doing here with the podcast. So we're giving people a voice that otherwise would not share their story, or when they do share their story, they're sharing it, kind of in an urgent way. So sharing your story with the whole world, and knowing that people are going to actually listen to it is really empowering. So it's empowering not only to the person who's sharing their story, but it's also really empowering to other people who see that they're not alone. So things like RuPaul's Drag Race, things like, sitcoms that are actually having, couples on there that are gay. All of those things that have kind of become more norm in our society, I think have allowed people to actually really see that it doesn't have to be a specific way. The thing that I think keeps people in this compulsory heterosexuality, I think, is kind of what you were saying about religion, and I was saying about religion, but it's not just like the men that are running the religions. It's also the women who have kind of an internalized misogyny about women in general. So I think in the church, there's this cognitive dissonance where there's hypocrisy, where they're working against women's rights because the ERA is bad. The church speaks out against the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. And they also speak out against LGBTQIA plus rights, but then they stand over the pulpit and they express their love and support for them, in a way that just feels gross. It feels like, you can't say something and then do the opposite. You can't say something about supporting and loving them and then you're doing something to make it so they can't have the right to be married, the right to, have insurance, the right to whatever the rights are that they should be able to have, because everybody has the opportunity and should be allowed the opportunity to find that connection regardless of what the gender is of the other person that they're with. So there's this internalized misogyny, where misogyny is the hatred of, contempt for, or prejudice against women or girls. Women who are experience that internalized misogyny express that misogyny through minimizing the value of women, mistrusting women, and believing that gender bias is in favor of men. So I just think that that's really important to note, because in the church, I remember saying this, that women were equal in the church, that we had equality. I felt equal. There were a lot of people that still say, I feel equal. I'm a woman, but I feel equal. Well, equality is not a feeling.
No.
Equity is not a feeling. So people tend to be in this position of that, bringing up that word cognitive dissonance again, where if they put their blinders on, they don't have to believe it's happening. Or if they thought stop by saying, I have a testimony that this is the way that it's supposed to be, then they don't have to acknowledge that this is a real part of society and that they have been kept in a box where they have not had the right or the ability to figure out who they are and if they actually have feelings for the same sex, or if they would have feelings for the same sex if they were given the opportunity.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention that when I was looking at your article, and I told you this already, but when I was looking at that article, I noticed, so there must have been a hyperlink that said feminism, and I accidentally clicked on it, but what I accidentally found was actually really disgusting to me. And this is kind of goes along with what I was just talking about with the thought stopping and the testimony and the cognitive dissonance. So the first quote that came up when I accidentally clicked on feminism was a quote by Brigham Young, or attributed to him, where it says, you educate a man, you educate a man. You educate a woman, you educate a generation. And you and I were kind of talking about this quote before we started recording, and we're saying that we don't think necessarily it means what it doesn't. It's not a feminist quote necessarily, but they're trying to make it seem like it's a feminist quote. What I really think was happening there is the thing is in the church that you cannot have women or men looking at sources outside of the gospel that are not approved sources. So when we're talking about educating a man and educating a woman, we're talking about educating them with approved church sources. So we're not talking about educating them to be a doctor or educating them to be a philosopher or educating them outside of the confines of the Mormon church. or the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, where people are encouraged to go to BYU, and that I always thought that was like a status kind of thing, but now I realize that this is more an indoctrination kind of thing, where
100%.
this quote by Brigham Young was not about education, it was about indoctrination. So I'm changing the words that he had in here. You indoctrinate a man, you indoctrinate a man. But if you indoctrinate a woman, you indoctrinate a generation. And you create generational trauma. Because women are not allowed to think for themselves. They're only allowed to think within this box of indoctrination.
Yeah, that's absolutely what, you were talking about how, like, after your husband left the church, you felt like you were responsible for, your family getting to the celestial kingdom. And I think most women within the church feel that pressure, that they are the ones that keep family home evening going. They are the ones that keep their husband on the straight and narrow. They're the ones that will monitor internet usage and make sure that they're not looking at porn or not doing what they shouldn't be doing. They will become the sheriffs because they feel responsible for getting their family to church and to the celestial kingdom, and they will be the ones pushing. Like, I know within my family, I was the one pushing. And
me too.
Yeah, and while my husband attended church with me, and he was a believer, and I think he still believes some of it, the minute I stopped going to church, everyone stopped going to church. Like, I told my husband when I first told him that I didn't believe anymore, I said, I will still go. I will still fulfill the role if you want me to. I will do, I'll be physically and mentally out, but I was like, I need you to know where I am. And he never once wanted to go to church. And I told my son, was about 15 at the time, and he felt like he still needed to be going to church. And I was like, look, if you want to go to church, I'll take you. I'll sit beside you. But I'm not getting you up in the morning. You have to get yourself up and dressed. And not once did he ever get himself up and dressed, because I always was the one to get him up, make sure he had Sunday clothes. Like the minute that it was on him, not anymore. It's always the women that push it. And so you're right. You indoctrinate a woman, that generational indoctrination and generational trauma stays. Yeah. and it just perpetuates. And it's the women that run it. It's the way that it is.
Yeah. Well, it's the women that perpetuate it, but it's the men who maintain control over it.
Yep. Yeah. And one thing within this article, it also talks about men. I know a lot of this we're talking about, compulsory heterosexuality for women, but it also affects men as well. It affects everyone. And it talks about compulsory heterosexuality necessarily requires both men and women to reinforce and construct that compulsory heterosexuality impacts. It says, ergo, compulsory heterosexuality, I can't talk, impacts men as well. It says, even heterosexual males reported being negatively impacted by compulsory heterosexuality through being groomed to aggressively pursue women and through the interactions that society allows them to have with other males. And it goes on to say, these norms demand that men deny most emotions, save for anger, be hard at all times and in all ways, and engage in objectification of women and sex itself, and participate in the continuum of violence against women. So these men are taught from a young age that they can't have emotions. You don't cry. You don't have emotions. You pursue the woman. You have these sexual urges that, it's the woman's job to quell those, heaven forbid a woman have sexual desires.
Yeah. or show their shoulders.
Right.
Because women are responsible for the feelings and thoughts of men.
Right. And we're taught that all the time from very young age, in conference talks and in talks, I don't know if I brought this up in one of the episodes or not, but I clearly remember during COVID when they were doing and I was still in the church, they were doing young men, young women activities via Zoom. And I was in the same room with my son once when he was in a young men's activity, and they were talking about modesty. And of course, when young men are talking about modesty, they're talking about the young women being modest, not about,
Right.
you know. And one of the leaders was told this story about how when he was in high school in marching band, there was this girl that would wear really short shorts, and it just made him uncomfortable. So he called her out on it, and she didn't wear those short shorts anymore. And he was just saying how it's okay for, if you feel uncomfortable around a woman, it's okay for you to call them out on their clothing so that they make better choices. And I got so angry. Like,
it is not okay.
I immediately unplugged his laptop to disconnect him from the room. And I sat down with my son and I said, it is not a woman's job for you to control your thoughts. I said, it's that girl he's talking about is at band camp. It's 500 degrees. Heaven forbid she wears short shorts.
Right.
She wasn't trying to show her legs. She was trying to be cool, cool off. It's, it's nothing to do, and I was like, if he couldn't control his thoughts, that's on him. And my son was like, I know,
Right. But the more that's put into your mind, it's this indoctrination is basically just saying something over and over and over again until you believe that it's true. And having people like this young men's leader or whoever it was that was talking to them say this thing, he's believing that that's actually true, that he has the right to tell somebody they're making him uncomfortable with their clothing choices. So in order for him to be comfortable, she has to be uncomfortable.
Right.
Like, if I'm comfortable in my own skin, my own body, and I choose to run around with my shirt off because that's legal in Utah, I don't have to wear a bra. I could run around with my shirt off because men can run around with their shirts off,
right. So
and breasts have been sexualized when they're actually a mechanism for feeding our children,
Right.
Women didn't sexualize breasts. We didn't make them some sexual object that is desirable. Men did that.
Yep.
So we're, these things are projected upon us as though they're our fault, but really it's society that has taught men to believe that they have the right to have control over women's bodies so that they can have control over themselves.
Right.
And to have control over women's bodies so they can lose control.
Yep. And it's not their fault if they lose control.
Right.
One thing in this article, it gives 8 characteristics of male power, or manifestations of male power, and it's this male power, and that's probably why this article linked to feminism, because so much of compulsory heterosexuality is around the societal norm for men and the patriarchal system. So trying to pull down compulsory heterosexuality is right in line with pulling down the patriarchy.
Right.
And of course, we're not, a little disclaimer, we're not, putting this on all men. It's the societal patriarchal society that we live in that needs to change. It doesn't mean that all men are awful. But there was 8 points of this manifestations of male power. It says the idea states that male dominance in a patriarchal society is a major factor in enforcing compulsory female heterosexuality. And some of these we see every day, and then some of them not so much. But the first one, it's rejecting a woman's sexuality. Rejecting the fact that a woman can innately be sexual. They can have sexual feelings. They can have sexual desires. It's not just a man, they're not just there to fulfill the man's sexuality. They can, the second one is forcing male sexuality upon women. That's right in line with the first one, where, the woman isn't thought to be sexual. The man's the sexual one. The man dictates what the sexuality is.
Before you go on, how many women have you talked to in the church who have never had an orgasm?
A lot.
And so there's one person that I can think of that I actually had this conversation with, that she had said that she had never had an orgasm, but then she was like, but that's not something I want. And I'm like, how do you know if it's not something you want? Like, the whole idea behind sexual copulation in the church is to procreate.
Yeah.
So she didn't think that it was right to have an orgasm. But yet, in order for a man to impregnate a woman, they really do need to have an orgasm.
Right.
I mean, I guess they can pre-cum, but, still, like, that's the goal for a man when having sex, is to have an orgasm. But for women in the church there are so many women in the church that have never had an orgasm, or that they are there to fulfill the needs of their husband's sexuality.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where I was for the last, 10 years of my marriage. We almost split up 10 years ago. And now I'm kind of wishing that we did, because it almost feels like, a wasted 10 years that we tried to stick it out. But I didn't want to split up 10 years ago. And I told my husband I would do anything to make him happy. And one thing that I did, like, this wasn't on him, but this was on me. I swore that I would never turn him down sexually again. And
Yep.
And I think within those 10 years, there was maybe 3 times that I turned him down.
Mm-hmm.
And so that means that there was a lot of times that we had sex and I didn't want to.
That it was it was coerced.
And it was
right?
just, and yeah, and I hate to put that on him, because, I was like, in my mind, and what I was taught with the church and everything was that is what we do. We're there to please the man, and it's our job to make them happy at all costs. And so, yeah, it was, a lot of the time sex was just like, all right, how long is this going to take? Like, can we get this over with? And that's not what sex should be. It's not at all. Yeah.
Yeah. I agree. I think I did the same thing, but here the opposite kind of happened between me and my husband, where he was very uncomfortable with me initiating sex, and so I would be rejected all the time, and I could only be rejected so much until it became something that was like internalized for me, that I had decided from early on in our marriage that I wasn't what he wanted. Like, if he's just going to keep rejecting me when I make sexual advances, then I'm not what he wants. And then when I see he's looking at porn on the computer, I'm not what he wants. And then I find out he's gone on a date with some woman, I'm not what he wants, So really, like, I was internalizing something that was never really about me to begin with. It's about him.
Yeah.
His behaviors, his decisions are all things that he's trying to fulfill, or fulfill some kind of need of his. He'll fill some kind of hole, fix. That was funny. That wasn't supposed to be a pun, but that was really funny. That he had insecurities, inadequacies, feelings of fear and abandonment, and his own trauma that he was trying to fix by going out and finding connection with other people that was not consensual in our relationship. So I don't hate him. It's taken me a long time to get to the point that I don't hate him, but hating somebody in your relationship when you're married to them is not really conducive to having a healthy sexual relationship anyway. Yeah. But we were the most healthy in our relationship after I left the church and before he wanted to open our relationship. So it was good to have that period of seeing each other and being able to actually like understand where the other person is coming from and what the other person's thoughts and desires and needs are, and fears. But I think when you realize that your whole marriage has been based on trying to stay together because you're trying to maintain eternal salvation within the church, and that there have been so many betrayals in an effort to not lose the person, that it can't be repaired a lot of times. So But again, I still think he's a good person. I think he's got a lot of trauma, like I do, but he has some things he needs to work out. What you were saying earlier, I can't remember exactly where this came in, but you were talking about, well, we're talking about compulsory heterosexuality, but I think that there's also compulsory homophobia, where we have men who are running the church and they're taught by the time that they're 12 that they are above their mother, so they have more authority than their mother. They are taught, we're all taught from a very young age that we are the chosen generation, that we have all the truth, that, you know, it's this narcissistic belief system where you have everything that somebody else needs. And then you put boys in charge of women, and boys are made to believe that they have more power, and then you put them in positions of authority. And then in order to be accepted in that society and to be, you know, promoted up the ranks in those, you know, those positions of authority, you have to continue to be what they say that you're supposed to be. I have a theory that men in political positions and women who have internalized misogyny in political positions actually are just very, very homophobic and scared to even acknowledge that there is a possibility that if they were to experience it themselves, that they probably wouldn't be so, they probably would not be so set on the idea that it's wrong.
Yeah.
That if they were given the opportunity to explore their own sexuality outside of the bounds of believing that it's a sin, that they probably would not have the feelings and push the legislation that they push. And I also honestly believe that there are so many men in the church and outside the church who have repressed their own homosexual feelings in order to maintain their own masculinity and their own power, and their own rank inside of the Mormon church, that they have to continue being this homophobic person in order to maintain the position that they have.
Yeah.
To maintain their respect within the group of people, the culture that they ascribe to. But do they really believe it? Like, I wonder if, like, deep down, if they were able to actually explore not just their sexuality, but actually see and understand and associate with people who are also exploring their sexuality, would they actually believe it's wrong? Like, you know, my ex-girlfriend now, we broke up. We would take baths together. And even like like a friend taking a bath with a girlfriend, what's wrong about that? Like, if you have, it's like our bodily autonomy, you know? Like, can we stop making this all about sex?
Yeah.
You know, it's not just about the act of sex. It's about the ability to connect with a person and to truly see them and to reclaim your childhood. I don't know. I feel like there's so many rules and expectations and beliefs around sin that people are just afraid to be present with another human being, especially if they are not of the opposite sex. And really, if you are, and what I mean by being present, like being in a compromising situation, I guess is what we want to call it, where you could possibly be have feelings towards the other person in a sexual way.
Yeah. What I was trying to find in the article, and for some reason I can't find it, so I guess it's, you know, a stupor of thought, and I'm not supposed to share it, but I'm going to share it anyway.
You're a sinner. You're a sinner.
But it actually talks about how, you know, the lesbian erasure, you know, saying that, like, the lesbian feelings are erased, because of the compulsory heterosexuality. And
Yeah.
it even talks about how women, have that deep friendship, and how, often we discount our relationships with other women or with other people of the same sex. I'm not going to even, say it's just lesbianism or just women, men too. We discount those friendships and relationships with people of the same sex just because they're of the same sex. Mm-hmm. And it even talks about when it's going through the lesbian erasure, it even talks about how it's good for a woman at some point in their life, even if they think they're even if they think they're heterosexual, to have a homosexual or a lesbian experience with another woman,
right.
To see, how it feels to them or whatever. And it made me, this is stupid, but it made me, I'm a huge fan of The Office. I watch The Office all the time.
Yeah.
And there's one part in it where Andy, one of the characters, Andy, is trying to figure out if he's gay. And he's talking to Jim, that's on The Office. And Jim was like, well, there's one way to figure it out. And Andy's like, what's that? And Jim says, well, have sex with a woman. And Andy's like, yeah, I can do that. And then Jim's like, and have sex with a man. And Andy's like, oh. And Jim's like, and then see how it feels. And that's exactly as of course that bit was supposed to just be humorous in the show, but that's what the article was talking about. Right. Open yourself up to experiences, even if they're not sexual experiences. Open yourself up to connecting with another human, regardless of genitalia. And if you've found your person and it's a heterosexual relationship, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
But don't be afraid just because of someone's gender to have those relationships or have those connections, even if it doesn't turn sexual. Like sometimes those connections with another human can be amazing, Yeah,
absolutely.
I liked that. I don't know why I can't find it in there, but it's a long article.
It is it's like 40 pages long.
It's a very good article, though.
It is a very good article. And, going with some of the things that were in the article and kind of finding other information, one of the things that came up for me was intersectional feminism. In the church, feminism is bad. Like, feminism is wrong. So it's interesting because feminism, all feminism is just standing up for the rights and empowerment of women.
Yeah.
And then you have intersectional feminism that's standing up for and recognizing, acknowledging the discrimination against women of all races, sexualities, minority groups, and not just white women, white cisgendered women. So intersectional feminism, what I wrote down some of the definitions because I think that I'm a feminist. I feel like I'm an advocate. I feel like I am an empath, an empathetic person to the needs of other people, despite or regardless of what, who they are. Intersectional feminism, the many different ways a woman experiences discrimination. So white feminism is a type of feminism that overshadows the struggles of women of color, LGBTQ women, and women of other minority groups. And a form of feminism, so intersectional feminism is a form of feminism that stands up for the rights and empowerment of all women, taking seriously the fact of the differences among women, including different identities based in radicalization, sexuality, economic status, nationality, religion, and language. So white women are subject to a wage gap, and some women are more harshly affected due to their race. And while women, being the weaker sex, and I'm putting that in quotes, weaker sex, are more vulnerable to being murdered, women of color and transgender people are more likely to be victims than cisgendered people. So it's just saying, feminism, yes, feminism is good. However, intersectional feminism and recognizing the discrimination that happens to women that are not just white women, and not just cisgendered women. it's really important. I think it's one of the reasons that I think that's really important is because it plays into like homosexuality or homophobia and compulsory heterosexuality play into the idea that women are not equal.
Yeah.
You know, women need to be conquered. Women need to be owned. Women need to be quiet and sit and, you know, only do what they're told. And including in the church, like women have only the callings that are for women. You know, men can come into Relief Society and talk to the women in Relief Society. There were a lot of times when I was a teacher in Relief Society where they would have the bishop come in and take like 30 minutes and speak to the women. Yeah. It's like, do we need you to come in and teach us how to be women, to teach us how to be good women? Like, what is it that you're trying to tell us? But women do never, ever go into elders quorum meetings and speak to the men.
No.
You know, because women, right, women don't have authority. But yet women feel equal in the church, even though it's very blatantly clear that we are not equal when we're women in the church. We're not even equal to our 12-year-old son.
Right.
So I just feel like there's so many things that play into the compulsory heterosexuality, that so many layers that are not just about exploration and not just about like owning your own sexuality and learning about your own sexuality, but there's so many ways in which we prevent people from being anything but compulsorily heterosexual.
It's a hard word. That whole
it
thing,
is.
Heterosexuality.
Yeah.
I tend to, thankfully I've grown out of it mostly, but I have a stutter. And sometimes big words like that are hard, you know.
They
are
hard.
When I was first introducing the episode, for some reason I often get stuck on Latter-day Survivors. Like it's a little bit of a stutter. But those big words are hard.
Right. We just have to say it slow, right?
Yeah.
Words are hard. I like words though. Words are fun.
One thing I wanted to get back to this list of the 8 manifestations of male power, because we were kind of talking about that anyway.
Oh yeah.
And I wanted to bring up that song that we had been texting about. So number 3 is words are hard. Exploiting women's labor. And that the little definition that it gives here: by means of the institution of marriage and motherhood as unpaid productions, the horizontal segregation of women in paid employment, the decoy of the upwardly mobile token woman, male control of abortion, contraception, sterilization, and childbirth, pimping, female infanticide, which also robs mothers and of daughters and contributes to generalized devaluation of women. So talking about exploiting women's labor, that song that we've been talking about, it's by Paris Paloma, and it's called Labor. It's such a beautiful song, and it has such amazing undertones that it really brings out the generational anger and generational rage of so much being put on women throughout the years. And like, I know, like I was saying earlier, a lot of it I put on myself because it's just how I thought it was. You know, my husband went to work, and he worked hard. He was a very good provider. I'm not going to take that away from him. He worked 16-hour days, you know, like he built a company from the bottom up. He did amazing. And I put everything else on myself, keeping the house up, keeping the kids up, I was the one that would get up with them at night. I was the one that would clean them up if they were sick. I was the one that took care of them because that was my job as the woman. I was the one that would plan birthday parties and plan doctor's appointments and school appointments, and I wouldn't put any of that on him. I wouldn't even most of the time, I wouldn't even request that he would have to come with me to the doctors or even know what's going on. I would tell him what was going on, but I wouldn't require that of him. Right. And it sounds little, and it sounds like, oh, the man's doing so much work, providing, but there's so much emotional and physical labor that women put on themselves because generationally, that's what we were told we have to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that male man, it's definitely a manifestation of male power that women continue to do that, continue to take on that emotional labor
Mm-hmm.
of all of the care of the house, all of the care of the children, just so that the man can go out and provide.
That makes me think of, I don't know how prevalent this is in the church, but I know that it has affected me in my life. That men are also put in a box, right? They're expected to be the provider. They're expected to, to be the priesthood holder. They're expected to lead their family in the way that is respectable in the church to maintain their own status, and to maintain the status of their family, really. So when men are expected, have expectations put upon them of what they should be, but that's not what they want to be, and they do it anyway, there's a lot of resentment. And I think that this happens a lot with women. So with me, my experience with this, the first experience I had with this was that I had a stepdad that was sexually abusive to me, but also he was abusive in a way to my mom, where he would. So he was a good Mormon, by the way. He was worthy to hold the priesthood, and that was attractive to my mom, who thought that that was the right thing, or thought that was what the desirable thing was. And he basically got married to my mom, had a job for a short period of time, and then my mom was supporting our family and him.
Yeah.
And he would act like he was trying to find a job, but he was downstairs on his, Tandy computer or DOS-based computer looking at DOS-based porn. And he would just let my mom do everything, including support our family. And so I think that there are men who, yes, they are at fault for this, and yes, they probably have some depression and issues with being able to support their family because they're not motivated, whatever, but it's wrong that they're putting everything on their wife. So this happened to my family with my stepdad. It also happened to my family with me. So my husband has only had a full-time job in our relationship for the first 7 years, probably about the first 10 years of our relationship. And then since then, he's only had a part-time job. And I've had a full-time job, plus a PRN position, or an as-needed position. Plus, I was going to school to finish degree after degree to try to make it so that I could support the family. And on top of that, I was doing all of the other things. I was doing the dishes or doing the laundry, or, and finally I got to a point that I was like, I'm not doing your laundry anymore. And each of the kids needs to learn how to do their own laundry. I will help the kids do their laundry, but I'm not doing everything. I will do my own laundry. But I stopped doing all the things, and I tried to put things over on him or over on the kids. The problem is they're so used to being taken care of and being given this thing that they don't want to give it up, And so if I ask for something, if I ask for help with something, then that thing becomes a chore for them rather than, this is something that you actually should be doing. You should be contributing to the family in certain ways. When I ask you to do something and you say you're going to do it, but then later gaslight me and tell me that you never told me that you were going to do it, or you just don't do it and then you have to be nagged and nagged and nagged and nagged and nagged, it's a form of abuse, It's a form of, I feel like I can't ask for help. Because if I ask for help, this other person is not going to do the thing I ask them to do unless I nag them enough. And even then it becomes them being angry with me. Yeah. So this has happened with my husband. It's happened with my kids. And it's my fault in a way because I've enabled people to not have to do things. Because if I don't want to, if I ask someone to do it and I know they're not going to do it or not going to do it in a time period that's reasonable to me, then I end up just doing it myself.
Yeah.
So they know that that's going to happen. So then they just don't take any of the burden off of me. So I think in the church, I think there's a lot of families that go through this. I think that there are a lot of families that the mother is not just the mother, but is also carrying more than her share of the burden. And part of it is that out of necessity, if the man isn't going to go get a job, then the woman's going to have to.
Yeah.
But then the man is going to sit at home and play video games or watch porn or whatever, and they're not actually going to help with the household stuff. So, and this isn't to say that there aren't stay-at-home dads that actually do a phenomenal job, because I think that there absolutely are. But what about the women who are, and men probably have this too, where they have a wife who won't do anything, right? There's not a partnership in that situation. There's enabling and codependency. How do you get out of that? And why is it so prevalent in organized religion?
Yeah, for sure.
I think part of it is because women think that they have to stay married. Men think that they have to stay married because that's their eternal salvation on the line.
Right. I just watched a TikTok yesterday. TikTok has been amazing and awful all at the same time. I just watched a TikTok yesterday trying to destigmatize, I don't know if that's a word, divorce. And he was saying, the guy was saying, there's no moral value in staying married. He said, if you stay married, it's just because you woke up and decided not to call a lawyer that day. Mm-hmm. And he said that there was this man who had died, and he and his wife had been married for 45 years before he died. And he was like, oh, that's amazing. And then he's like, well, why is that amazing? That doesn't mean that he wasn't an asshole. There's many assholes that stay married, and then there's many divorced people that are not assholes, And he was saying there's no morality in staying married just to stay married. I think we were talking earlier, like when I had mentioned that my husband and I almost split up 10 years ago, the only reason we didn't was because of the church. Because in the church, you don't get divorced. And if you do, there's a huge stigma around it. The only reason we didn't was because of the church and because of the kids. And now, since we've left, well, I left the church. My ex doesn't attend anymore, but he's still on the rolls. But now we're getting divorced, and we're both so much happier. And we would have been happier 10 years ago. But the church puts morality on divorce. And if you get a divorce, then that's immoral. And I know there's a lot of whisperings going on right now about my divorce among his family. And I don't think it's really among the church, because we haven't attended in a couple of years, and we've kind of fallen off the radar, especially since I removed my records. But I know around his family, there's a lot oh, Sarah moved out. I'm the one that moved out, even though he's the one that requested the divorce to begin with. I moved out. So I know in there, and of course they're only hearing his side. There's so much. They look at me as being immoral, and me being the one that broke the marriage. I mean, and in reality, it needed to happen. We needed to split up. We weren't happy. We're so much happier apart. We've both moved on. We're so much happier. Things are better. There's no morality in staying married.
So agreed, 100%. I can concur with that, with the same relationship, or the same issue in my relationship with my husband. But the thing that I think was, for me, feels in retrospect very abusive, is that while my husband did not believe in the church anymore and wasn't wanting to go to church, when I wanted a divorce or when I wanted a separation, he would throw the church in my face, because he knew it was something that I still believed in. We're Mormon. We can't get a divorce. well, are we Mormon? Because it seems like I'm the only one that's Mormon, you
Right.
know? So he would manipulate and say, we can't get a divorce because we're Mormon. It's against our religion. And I'm like, well, it's against my religion, but it's not against your religion because you're not Mormon, You
Yeah.
don't practice. So don't it got really gross, looking back at things like that. I think about also like what you were saying about your son wanting to go to church, but not being motivated enough to get himself up and go. Um, my kids left the church before I did, and I feel like they've saved my life in many ways, but they they stopped going to church, and it actually had me in this limbo of anxiety, shame, anger, fear, where I was afraid of what other people thought, and realizing that I was more afraid of what other people thought than I was about losing my relationship with my kids at some point, while I was going to church still and while I still believed it. Um, so I was so focused on the church being true and losing my kids not having the church in their lives than I was about my happiness and their happiness. What you were saying about waking up your kids to go to church, you were the one that was doing it
Every time.
every time. And what I realized, one thing that I really had a hard time with, was that I was the one that had to be in control. Like, I was the one who thought I could control other people, and that it was my responsibility to control other people, like my kids. So then when I would try to get them up to go to church and they wouldn't get up, wouldn't get up, wouldn't get up, wouldn't get up, I was getting really angry and really frustrated. And, and the fear sets in also, where I can't get my kids to church, but it's my responsibility to get them to church. So then
Yeah.
if anybody goes with me and I get there, then I'm angry. And how am I possibly going to feel in quotations or quotations, the spirit?
Spirit. Yeah.
The reality is that it's not. There's no spirit in that. There is no. It's going against my intuition. It's going against my wishes to have a relationship with my kids. It's going against my wishes to have a relationship with my husband when we were married. It's going against all of those things to ensure that the church is the priority.
Yeah.
So you cut out the church, and it's not just that you start exploring your sexuality when you leave the church. It's that you actually open up this cage, the door to the cage, that allows you to see everybody that's in the cage, because you've been in the cage before.
Yeah.
But then you get out and you're like, none of these people outside of this cage are evil.
No.
None of them are having any intention to be a bad person. I mean, sure, I'm sure there's some people that are, but the more I gain distance from the church, the more I realize that people in organized religion and cults and can't see anything but themselves and the religion. They can't truly see people,
Yeah.
because their vision is clouded by judgment and fear.
Yeah. I think one point of cognitive dissonance that you just reminded me of that I had while I was still in the church.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, my husband at the time, he's a business owner, and we would go on business meetings that he would have. And there was one business meeting that we went to a couple times that was in Aruba.
Mm-hmm.
Why they had business meetings in Aruba? Why not? But
Right.
one of the people in his business group owned a condo in Aruba, and so they would go down there and have the business meeting in Aruba, and then of course, after the meeting they would hang out on the beach and everything. But one thing of cognitive dissonance I had was, my husband and I always placed, tithing and church attendance and everything, like, we had this fear that if we didn't pay our tithing, if we didn't go to church, if we didn't do those things, then his business would not do well. And we wanted his business to do well because that was how we live. That's how we would get income, was his business doing well. And it had to do well, so we had to pay our tithing. We had to check all of the boxes. And we had this innate fear, like if we missed tithing or something would happen, that we wouldn't do well. And anyway, we were down there in Aruba. And the guy that owns the condo down there, obviously they're not Mormon. They have a business that was the same type of IT business as my husband's, and that's what the business group was a whole bunch of IT company owners that would get together and talk business and help each other through things. And the guy had recently sold his company for like $10 million, obviously doing well financially. His marriage to his wife is beautiful. They're happy. They've been married like 30 some odd years. They're obviously doing very well financially, have plenty of money. They're business consultants now. And I was like, they're not members of the church. There are people that I see, like obviously there's rich people out there, but they're not real to you. But these people are real to me. I see them. I'm friends with them. I talk to them. They're real people. They're not members of the church. They've never heard of the church. Why are they so blessed? They don't pay their tithing. They don't check all the boxes. Why are they so blessed? But we have to do all these things for my husband's company to do well. And that was one of the first things of cognitive dissonance for me, that it's just like, well, why do some people do so well without the church? Why do they have happy marriages? Why are they good people? Why do their companies do well? I know that sounds stupid and it has nothing to do with what we're talking about.
No, it absolutely does, because cognitive dissonance is basically the whole premise of why people are are heterosexual without belief that they could be anything else. Another cognitive dissonance spot or topic is the underwear.
Oh yeah.
Garments. If I take my garments off, I am going to die, basically. The garments are protecting me from death. It's like, now looking back, I think about like paying tithing before paying my bills is going to help me to stay on top of my bills. Wearing underwear that feels terrible, that looks terrible, that when I worked in Colorado as a nurse, people would ask me about all the time because it was not normal.
Right.
And we do this because it's going to protect us. We do this because it's the right thing to do to help our family to thrive. But the only thing that the Mormon Church did for my family was destroy it.
Yep.
It destroyed my relationships with my husband, destroyed my relationship with my kids. And now leaving the church has restored a lot of relationships, but it's also caused like my mom, my brother, my sister to be afraid of me and to think that I'm like a sinner. But what they don't want to see is for me to do well outside of the church. I was watching a video on, I think it was on Facebook, about softening your heart. And I think it was somebody who was on the podcast before, Catherine. I think it was one of hers, about narcissism. That our family members, when they're Mormon still, and they are actually praying for us to soften our hearts, or for our hearts to be softened, they're praying for bad things to happen to us.
Yeah.
So that we'll come back, because they want us to need them. They want us to need the church. So by bad thing after bad thing after bad thing happening, then we look for purpose. And I don't believe that, I'm so far out of the church at this point that I could never find purpose in something that destroys people and destroys relationships.
Yeah.
Why would my family want me to suffer? Because if I don't suffer and I thrive, then it disproves the idea that not being a member of the church is a bad thing. Yep.
And that's so often people, and I remember lessons on this. and missionaries being taught this, that they're supposed to seek people out that are struggling in life. You know, people that have lost their job or lost a child or
Yep.
went through, you know, some awful thing, because that's, you know, that's when they can get them.
Because they're vulnerable. It's a manipulative tactic. Yeah.
Right. And when I was in the church, I thought, I was like, oh yeah, that's when their hearts are soft, and that's when they're, you know, drives me crazy.
It's gross. It's really gross. It's predatory.
Yeah. Yeah. And what also drives me nuts that I did when I was within the church, and I've seen, you know, you talk about how you see things a lot more clear when you're outside of the church, is people, like a friend of mine within the church the other day had, oh no, this wasn't even within the church, but it was a news story. And here in Ohio, this was a big news story. 2 twins, they were babies in carriers, were in a running car, and that car was stolen. Like the mom pulled up to a gas station, left the car running, and went into the gas station to get something. Someone stole the car with the babies inside. And then they found one of the babies at the Dayton airport and didn't find the other baby till days later, and it was in Indianapolis. But they found both babies. And everyone, you know, that was following it was like, oh, it's such a miracle. God answers prayers. God is with us. God, you know, I'm like, if God had anything to do with that, why were they stolen in the first place?
Yep.
You know, like how can they point to that being a miracle? And God would be the one to allow it to happen to begin with, you know. And yes, it's fantastic that the babies were found alive, but then when everyone was attributing that to God, well, then you have to attribute them being stolen to God too.
Yeah, exactly. And you know, there's the whole thing about cognitive dissonance again. This belief in God, knowing the things that this God has done, at least in the scriptures. People believe that he's a loving God, but I think Esteban, remember Esteban? He was on the podcast. He had posted this.
I loved this episode.
He's great. He had posted this on his Facebook page, I think. A short history of God. 1, he creates Adam and Eve. 2, he creates evil. 3, he populates the world through incest. 4, surprised that evil exists. 5, clueless about how to deal with evil. 6, drowns the entire planet, saving only one small family of very, very skilled shipbuilders. 7, populates the world through incest, again. 8, surprised that the evil exists, again. 9, sends diseases, starvation, plagues, tsunamis, etc. 10, still bewildered by the existence of evil. 11, blames the devil that he created. 12, rapes a girl so she'll give birth to himself as his own son, that he can torture and kill his son so that he can forgive us for being so evil. 13, says, just joking, and 3 days later, he brings his son back to life because he's lonely. 14, claims omniscience and omnipotence. 15, expects to be worshipped for his wisdom.
Yeah.
So this just makes me think about every single leader of the Mormon Church, because they're oblivious to the hypocrisy. They're oblivious to their own cognitive dissonance. They're oblivious to what they're worshiping. You know, they won't put it in plain language, because then if it's put in plain language like this, then they would start questioning it.
Yeah.
And to question it means to lose their status in their culture. To question it means to lose relationships. But what they don't know when they've been raised in it and indoctrinated in it is that those relationships are not really a true representation of what it feels like to be connected.
Right.
To be truly connected to somebody and to actually want what's best for them rather than wanting them to be what's best for the church.
Yeah.
It's kind of gross.
It's very gross.
And I have a lot of shame around being a part of it for so long.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, me too. And that's something, you know, whenever it comes up, since since I've moved recently, and I moved about an hour and a half away from where I did live, but I had been coming out here for fairly regularly, so I have like a new friend group and everything out here. And whenever it comes up that I used to be Mormon, everyone's like, seriously? You know, like, because everything's so different now. But
Yeah.
yeah, it's crazy. Like, you talk about BYU being the place for indoctrination. I was so, and I remember actually being at BYU, and I remember being at like a spiritual fireside thing, something. And I remember thinking, like, how do I keep this feeling, you know, like this spirituality? Because I knew I was like, I'm going to lose it once I leave here.
Mm-hmm.
I knew that BYU was that. And I knew that it was that indoctrination. And it took me years to finally see clearly and be like, oh, so none of this made sense because it really didn't make sense. Like, for real.
Right. Right. It didn't, yeah. And the feeling that you were talking about, having that feeling, being able to take that feeling with you, I realized that that feeling, like when you're in fast and testimony meeting, or when you're in a meeting like that you were in, and you're having those, you know, those good feelings, like the Holy Ghost is speaking to you, right? What I've learned is that really it's just confirmation bias.
Absolutely.
You know, we hear these things from the time that we're young and have been told that they're true and right and good. And so when somebody confirms that in a testimony and tells a story of their experience, then it's going to, you know, trigger or inform that, support that belief, that you know, indoctrination, that confirmation. It confirms that over and over and over again. It's like bearing a testimony, right? We have people getting up and bearing their testimony and saying, I know the church is true. 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 Well, if they said often enough, pink elephants are real. You know, pink elephants are real. Pink elephants are real. Eventually, I'm going to believe that pink elephants are real and have a testimony of that. And then it's just more indoctrinated into me if other people also believe that. You know, if we're all supporting each other's belief in the church, then you feel like you're part of this community and that you're right. If you start questioning it, then you look around you and you see all these really smart people who believe in it and are not questioning it, or you don't think they're questioning it, and you think this is a me problem.
Yeah.
This isn't a church problem. This is a me problem. So we learn to just deny our own ability to question things, our own thoughts, in order to maintain that feeling.
Yeah.
But little do they know, that feeling happens out here too. And it's called intuition. It's called our own inner knowing. It's called trusting ourselves.
Yeah,
it's called connection, true connection.
It's our own consciousness. I process a lot of things through music, and I think a lot of people do. But one artist that I've really been following recently is, I'm going to say it wrong. I think it's Maddie Zom. I always say Maddie Zam, but I actually saw her in concert recently, and she said Maddie Zom, and I'm like, okay. I said it wrong this whole time. Yeah. But she was not a member of the Mormon Church, but she used to be a worship leader in a Christian church. I don't know exactly which one, non-denominational or something. But she's recently been sharing through her music how she has left the church scene and how she's coming out as gay. And I've really identified with a lot of her music and a lot of her what she's put out, because it obviously is the same thing I've been going through, you know, leaving a church, figuring out my own sexuality. And one of the lines in one of her songs, the song's called You Might Not Like Her. I love that song. There's 2 songs that she sings that, I mean, I love all of her songs, but 2 songs, You Might Not Like Her, and then the other one, It's Not God. But You Might Not Like Her. She has a line in there that says, convinced you're not bi because you're way too into guys. And she's talking about how it was that confirmation bias. Like anytime, like, yeah, she felt attraction to women, but anytime she felt attraction to a man, she was like, see, I'm not bi. Because so that, you know, she kept putting it into a closet or onto a shelf, so to say. the attraction that she had to women, because she did feel attraction to men. And it's that confirmation bias that we have all the time that, you know, convinces us of what we've been told is true, you know, like all those times, like when you're married or to a man or any, you know, anytime that you do feel any kind of attraction or sexuality towards the opposite sex, well, I can't be gay because I have that, you know?
Mm-hmm. And because I've been married to a man for so long, well, it's just turning off all of your other feelings because you think that that's cheating.
Right.
You know?
And that, her other song that I mentioned called "It's Not God."
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what it's called. She talks all about in that song about how if it's not God that led her away from the church, it was herself. And she sings all about her own inner knowing and that conscience that she had within herself, and why she had to leave the church, why she had to run far away from the church. And she said at her concert when I went, this was amazing. Because one thing that my girlfriend has asked me, and I've had other people ask me since I've left the church, they're like, well, do you still believe in God? And she said that she's had so many people ask her that, do you still believe in God? And she's like, they're missing the point. She's like, me leaving the church had nothing to do with God. It was leaving something that was harmful and toxic and something that was hurting people I love. I'm turning my back on that. It doesn't mean that I'm turning my back on God. She's like, my stance on God is no one's business. But I was
just like what's in your pants is no one's business.
Right. She's like, I was leaving the church. I was leaving the toxicity. I was leaving what was hurting me and other people. And that's, you know, so many people tie in, because obviously religion is God, but like in leaving religion, I found my own spirituality. You know, religion and spirituality are so different, and I didn't realize it was until I was out.
Yeah. Well, I think what I've learned in leaving the church, so I mostly turned like atheist, but I guess I'm more of an agnostic at this point, where I believe that God is basically the collective consciousness,
right?
You know, and the more connected, yay, the more connected that we are, the more connected to ourselves that we are, and to our own inner knowing and our own intuition, the more that we connect to each other, and the more that each of us are connected, the more that there is this collective consciousness of all of us are God. You know, we all have God in us, and the ability to be a part of this collective consciousness. So does that make us children of God? I don't ascribe to that anymore. I don't ascribe to a humanoid God. I don't think that that's true. I think that the goal is to be part of this collective consciousness where we're all interconnected with each other and can see how my behavior is going to affect, in like kind of the butterfly effect, somebody else. You know, it's going to, like, I'm going to choose to do things not because I've been told that this is right or wrong and that I have to follow these rules, but I'm going to choose to do something based on how I am affecting not only my own self, but other people. You know, it's a loss of selfishness, is for lack of a better term. Whereas I feel like religion has become so politicized, in the point that people are so hell-bent on protecting the religion that they have lost the ability to protect each other and to see each other. So the point, the drive of any religious entity is to protect itself. So it's going to indoctrinate the people to protect the religion above all else. I mean, you think about some of the old tokens and signs that were happening in the temple, where people were cutting their own throat, or, you know, symbolically cutting their own throat.
Yeah.
Why would people do that? Like, why would they turn their life over to the church unless they were indoctrinated in it?
Yeah. Yeah, that was one of the biggest shelf breakers for me, was when I found out that until 1990, there were those blood oaths within the temple, and they still happen. You just don't know it,
Yeah.
like with the thumb extended. That's a knife. I
Yep.
remember being in the temple wondering, why do we have to extend our thumb? What does that have to do with anything? They don't tell you what it is, but that's what it is.
Yeah, they're just making it more palatable and basically manipulating people into saying that they would sacrifice themselves for the church, you
Yeah.
know, and that they'll attribute all of their time and talents and everything they've been blessed with to the church. So instead of being your own person, like the church, the biggest threat to religion is people becoming their own person, is people becoming part of this collective consciousness where we can all be aware of the pain that other people have because of, discrimination, because of misogyny, because of organized religion and cult behavior, because of manipulation, where we can actually all try to take care of each other instead of taking care of an organization. So
I was kind of starting to look through my notes to see where else we are.
Yeah, I think I've gotten through most all the things that I had written down.
I wanted to quickly go over the last few manifestations of male power. I think we got through the first three.
Yeah.
We just, I love talking about all this stuff. But
so before you do that, will you let's just list all of them, so that there's no commentary between them. So if you just start over, I think that would be really good.
Yep. So the first one is rejecting women's sexuality. The second one is forcing male sexuality upon women. The third one is exploiting women's labor. Fourth, controlling or robbing women of their children. Fifth, confining women physically. Sixth, using women as objects for male transactions. 7, denying women their creativity. And 8, denying women from knowledge and cultural attainments. So, going through those, it sounds weird, like controlling or robbing women of their children, but that sounds like kidnapping, which it could be kidnapping. But then it's also things like you said, when a boy turns 12, they are given the priesthood, and then they're above their mother, and they're part of the patriarchy, and they're no longer, they're to look to their fathers, not to their mothers. Confining women physically, obviously that could be anything from rape, kidnapping the women, or even within the home, when it goes on. And denying women their creativity or denying women from knowledge, it's fairly recently that women have been able to get education and have been, it sounds like it's been happening for a long time, but it's recently that women are allowed to get to vote and to have education and to have careers. And so often women, definitely within the church even, could do these amazing things, could have careers, could learn, could go to college, but they get married at 19. They have
and then their labor is exploited.
Right. They have babies. They end up being stay-at-home mothers, which a lot of times that's what they want to do. That's what I wanted to do.
Well, that's what they're told they want to do. And so, confirmation bias says that that's what I want to do,
Right.
But women don't know when they're that age that they actually lose themselves. And if they've never been given the opportunity to figure out who they are to begin with, losing yourself is even more devastating, because your only identity is, I'm a mother. I'm a wife and a mother. I'm a wife and a mother. I'm a wife and a mother.
And that's it. And I remember reading a book to my daughter when she was little, 2, 3, 4, 5 years old. There was this book that was called I Want to Be. And it was all this mother talking to her daughter about what her daughter wanted to be when she grows up. And it, being a fireman, being a dancer, being a blah, blah, blah. But then at the end, the daughter just says she just wants to be a mother. And I thought at the time, oh, that's beautiful. That's what I wanted to be. I just wanted to be a mother. And, And then my daughter, very early on, was always saying that she was never going to get married. She didn't want to get married. She didn't want to have kids. She just wanted to grow up and have her cats. And that was just a joke. And I was like, well, in my mind, it was a joke. And I was like, as she grows, she'll grow out of that, she'll, but she was always, at church, even like I said, she's always been unapologetically herself, which I love, despite her being raised the first 12 years of her life in the church. I'm hoping it didn't screw her up too much, because she's always been unapologetically who she is. And when she was in 7th grade, so last year, after we had left the church, we were driving to school one day, and she just in passing made a comment about marrying this one girl that she was friends with or whatever. Like, oh, I would marry her, just, I don't know what it was. But I said something like, I thought you weren't going to get married. You were just going to grow up and have cats. And she said, that was before I knew I could marry a woman, and it's like, her whole life, like she must have known her whole life that she did not want to grow up and marry a man and have kids. She knew that she wasn't going to fit in. She was a square peg in a round hole. She was not going to fit in. She knew that's not what she wanted. And it was once I left and started opening the world to her that she realized, oh, maybe she could get married and have that connection, because it doesn't have to be with a man, and it doesn't have to be within the Mormon world that I had originally created for her. So
that's beautiful. That's beautiful. I feel the same way about my kids. Like, whatever their sexuality is I'm okay with that. And I think that by me owning and exploring my own sexuality, I think it's opened up the world to allow them to feel safe doing so, because they know I'm going to love them, and honor whatever their decision is. And honor their partners, whoever their partners might be. And that it doesn't have to be what I want it to be. Within the church, it's, you're going to get married to the opposite sex, and you're going to get married in the temple, and you're going to have, 17 children, and, and go to church every Sunday. And like all of those expectations on somebody from the time that you're young. I mean, this is how I lived my life up until I was 40.
Yeah.
I believed that was the right way because that's what I was told.
Yeah.
How many people are only doing it because that's what they've been told is the right way, and they've never known anything different?
Yep. And I think that really boils down exactly to what that compulsory heterosexuality is. It's
The thing that you said about the, what did it say about children, holding children hostage or something?
Controlling or robbing women of their children.
Yeah. So this patriarchal society that is the Mormon Church, if my kids didn't leave before I did, or didn't leave when I left, I would have felt like I still needed to go to church.
Yeah.
Because the idea of one person being left by themselves, or let me rephrase this. So if I left the church and my children did not, I would be cut off from my children.
Yeah.
My children leaving, if I did not, they cut themselves off from me because it's not safe.
Yeah.
The church does not promote eternal families. The church promotes eternal families only if they fit into this box, into this round hole.
Yeah.
But they don't, like, if somebody thinks differently, then they're cut off.
Yeah.
So nobody is safe to think differently. Nobody's family is safe if somebody in the family thinks differently.
Yeah. And I think this has been mentioned a lot in different podcasts, but you're taught to lie because no one checks every single box that the church puts in front of you. No one does. No one has the same ideals. There's always cognitive dissonance on one level or another. Mm-hmm. But you lie about it.
Right.
The church is true, and everything else is doesn't matter because the church is true. So any feelings that you might have aside from what the church teaches, you put those aside because the church is true, and you learn to lie, or you either lie to yourself, or if you can't lie to yourself, you lie to people around you to try to have that perfect existence, that perfect.
Acceptance. To be accepted within the culture, you have to lie.
Yeah.
And oftentimes it's people lying to themselves. Like the scrupulosity that comes from trying to be what what nobody can possibly be and be happy. They can lie to themselves that they're happy, but do they even know what happiness feels like?
Yeah.
And it's all a fear-based system. So if you're always afraid of what you might lose, if your family or yourself are any different than think differently than the institution, then you can't love unconditionally if you're loving out of fear.
Yeah.
And if you're behaving out of fear, if everything is based on fear.
Yeah. One thing, just changing the subject a little bit, because I wanted to make sure we called this out at some point. One thing that I don't think we've talked about a whole lot on the podcast, or that's really talked about much at all, is asexuality. Mm-hmm. And it's something like I had never heard of it until my daughter brought it up, saying that she was asexual. Mm-hmm. And I didn't understand it. Because we're inherently sexual people, right? Like so it actually calls out asexuality as well. It says the concept has also been used within asexual studies to develop the theory of compulsory sexuality, which argues that in addition to being subjected to the pressures of heterosexual conformity in a heteronormative society, individuals also face the assumption that everyone necessarily experiences sexual attraction unless they are sick, dead, or lying, leading to the erasure of asexual identities. And that's along the same lines, like we're just assumed to be heterosexual until we prove otherwise, until we come out of the closet, until, we're also assumed to be sexual, like, but there's so many asexual identities, and there's people that may be asexual and don't even realize it. For years within my marriage, I was sexual even though I didn't want to be, because I didn't want to turn him down and I didn't want to turn him away. And again, that's no fault on him. That's what I put on, but
was that out of fear though?
It was out of fear because I didn't want to lose him and I didn't want to have him go elsewhere. Mm-hmm. While I don't identify as asexual, I was not in a situation where I understood what my sexuality was. Yeah. And that's the same thing. So many people, asexual people, are forced to be sexual because they don't understand, or they don't know how that asexuality is even a thing. That it may be they just don't have sexual attraction, and that's okay. But they're put in this heteronormative society, and then they're in marriages or relationships where they feel like they have to be sexual.
Yeah, it's just an expectation to be able to, multiply and replenish the earth. You have to be sexual.
Right. And so it's just a lot. I think
women, one of the other things that kind of came up for me is women in the church, their value is based on how many children they have.
Yeah.
And so when women can't have children, they feel like they've lost their value.
Yeah. Yep. That's true. And that's one thing, like I only had 2 children, which I think is, exactly what I needed to have. Mm-hmm. But before I had kids, I wanted a lot of kids. I was a Mormon girl that wanted all the kids. I wanted 6, 7, 8 kids. Mm-hmm. But now I think it's very good that we only had 2 kids, especially since, we're divorcing now, and the kids are in the middle, and they almost become, even no matter how hard you try, they almost become collateral damage. Yeah. Because, you can't protect them when you and your spouse split up. Mm-hmm. They're going to struggle regardless. It's hard. It's hard on them. And there's not, we can try to make it easy, but it's hard on them. And I'm really glad that, but for years within the church, I felt oh, I only have 2 kids,
Mm-hmm.
and we tried for more and it didn't happen. And we're like, oh, that just must be God's will. But what's even funny, this is another off topic, but like in my patriarchal blessing, and we talk about patriarchal blessings, in my patriarchal
Mm-hmm.
blessing, it even said that as my husband and I create a loving home that will be blessed with many kids or something like that. It said the Lord will feel free to place spirits within our care. And we
Yeah.
only had 2, and I was like, I guess we didn't create a loving enough home.
Oh, I was thinking along the lines of that blessing will be manipulated, or you'll be gaslighted about that blessing, where it'll say, "Oh, well, that was just not in this life."
Right.
In the next life you'll have many children.
Right. When we're gods.
Yeah,
And
there's all, yeah, when we have a planet that is not really what we're going to get anymore,
right.
So, yeah, there's just so much grossness. I just
Yeah.
uh,
Yep.
so much
I'm gonna
hypocrisy.
page through my notes real quick. I think I brought up everything that I wanted to, but
Yeah, that was a good conversation. I liked it.
I love it, and I think it's something that's interesting that we're in this society, and it's something that needs to change, and the it needs to be more visual. Like there needs
Mm-hmm.
to be the pride parades, and there needs to be acceptance,
Yep.
because as there's more acceptance, there's more people that will be able to be their authentic selves. It's not going to turn anyone trans. It's not going to turn anyone gay,
Yeah.
but it will make people that are trans feel safe to be
Yeah.
who they are. And
Yeah.
people that are gay, it talks in this article about violence against homosexuality, especially within men.
Mm-hmm.
Men often are homosexual, not men are often are homosexual, but homosexual men often face a lot of violence, and trans women
Yep.
or even trans men face a lot of violence
Mm-hmm.
because they're in this society, they're often not safe. So
Yeah.
that's why it's important to have visibility
Mm-hmm.
and representation
Yeah.
of, LGBT people, so that
Mm-hmm.
LGBTQIA plus, so that they can be safe to be who they are. I think
Exactly.
the issue with the government recently, or the don't say gay things, and the
It's
trans
disgusting. It's so
the
disgusting.
yeah, and the ban on trans and
Mm-hmm.
different things like that, or drag, the ban on drag queens, drag shows. It's it, they say it's because kids don't need that in their face. They don't need to see that, but
Yeah.
they see heterosexuality all the time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a female teacher can go to work and talk about her husband. A female teacher can't go to work and talk about her wife. These kids don't have the representation to feel safe to be who they are. It's not going
Yeah.
to turn anyone gay. It's not going to turn anyone trans. It'll
Mm-hmm.
just allow them to be safe.
Yeah. Agreed. Agreed. And the more we talk about it, the more people can feel like they're not alone,
Right. Right. Right.
Okay.
Well, I appreciate you having this conversation with me today. This was
This was
fun.
great. I'm excited. I'm excited to edit it and get it out. It'll be fun.
Me too. Me too.
Yeah. Okay. I appreciate you.
Yeah, thank
We
you.
should do this more often. We can
We
probably
should.
do one with me, you, and Christina. I'd love to see if there's one that you and Christina want to do together.
That would be fun.
Having a conversation. I think that would be good.
And the 3 of us too would be fun. I think we would
Yeah.
talk all day.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. We could probably do one with the 3 of us that would be like, kind of talking about like what the podcast has done. Not the podcast specifically, but what it's been like to be the person that people tell their story to. What aha moments that we've had. What I don't know, something along those lines maybe, or something completely different. It doesn't have to be that, but
Cool.
because I know this has changed me in a lot of ways.
Me too.
Yeah. So, okay.
Alrighty.
All right.
Thank you for joining us on Latter-day Survivors. As survivors of trauma and abuse, we wanted to provide a platform for survivors to share their stories. Many survivors of all types of abuse may be able to recognize and relate to the patterns of behavior in the victims, abusers, families, and friends of the stories shared by other survivors on this podcast. Often, as we escape oppressive family, religious, and social constructs to a safer place where we come to see our abuse and all related issues, we are better able to process and begin to heal. We believe that when we share our stories with others, we can also help them to heal. It can take decades for survivors to find the courage to speak about these things. If it is so hard for adults, imagine how difficult it is for a child to speak up. We hope to normalize these discussions so that children can speak to adults earlier. As adults, we must listen and recognize the severity of the abuse, its potential consequences, and the need for action to stop the abuse as early as possible. Just knowing we are not alone, that there are other people who have felt and do feel the same or have endured similar experiences in life, can remind us that we are not alone in this.
I was born in rose-colored water. It seeped into my eyes and soul, and I didn't know the difference. Being blind was beautiful, but no amount of sweet addiction can stop the force of reality. In the bitter recognition, only you can set you free. I don't believe in saints, I don't believe in sinners. It's not black and white in life, it's like gray in the winter. And I don't believe in the kind of love I used to anymore. I jumped ship and I still got my middle fingers pointed from the shore. And it was worth it. If anyone wants to know, it was worth it. Let me reap what I sow. My mother's blood runs through my veins. We haven't spoken years. If we did, maybe I'd ask, what's it like to become your worst enemy? And there's two sides to every story, carved by pain and memory. Time will soften all the edges, but it's still stone I keep with me. I don't believe in saints, I don't believe in sinners. It's not black and white in life, it's like gray in the winter. And I don't believe in the kind of love I used to anymore. I jumped ship and I still got my middle fingers pointed from the shore. And it was worth it. If anyone wants to know, it was worth it. Let me